Kiara had served countless faces of power. But the night she broke protocol to speak to a little girl no one else dared to acknowledge was the night her destiny was rewritten. In a dining room where silence was usually a luxury for the rich, she never imagined her hands, moving in the quiet language of signs, would crack the ice around Korea's most guarded heart and unravel a romance dangerous enough to challenge the social hierarchy. The evening had a tension of its own. From the moment Kiara tightened her apron at the Han River Jewel, she sensed it. The air was heavy, the chandeliers seemed to glare, and every waiter's movements were sharp with anxiety. Something was coming. Kiara was accustomed to the dazzling world of Seoul's elite revolving around her. Shift after shift, she poured water for the city's most ruthless CEOs, celebrities, and heirs. Yet, she remained invisible to them. Just a blue and white uniform with a polite bow and lowered eyes. For an African woman working in the high-pressure service industry of Seoul, she already stood out, but not in the way she desired. To most guests, she was merely an exotic backdrop, a foreign curiosity who had somehow slipped into a space where people like her were expected to be seen but never heard. But Kiara was diligent. She had come here for reasons far deeper than their judgment. She was sending money back home, building a foundation of dignity to prove to herself that she could survive and thrive in a land that often looked right through her. That night, however, fate had prepared a collision she could never have predicted. A hush swept through the hall like a cold wind. The waiters stiffened, spines rigid, trays perfectly level. At the grand entrance, a man entered with the terrifying calm of someone who controlled the very air in the room. Tae-hyung. Even without the nervous whispers of the manager, Kiara recognized him instantly. His sharp features had dominated financial news feeds and business magazines across the nation. Billionaire'S, corporate shark, and the Prince of Ice. Everything about him commanded distance. His crisp dark suit, the steel in his posture, and the aura of absolute unapproachable solitude. But it wasn't Tae-hyung who got Kiara's attention. It was the small, trembling hand failing to grasp his. A little girl walked a few steps behind him, looking like a ghost in her own life. Her movements were skittish, almost fearful, like someone searching for cues she couldn't perceive. The hush in the room turned into uncomfortable murmurs. Some guests stared openly, others awkwardly averted their gaze to their plates. The girl was different. She didn't flinch at the clatter of silverware or turn toward the whispers. She was Yuna, the broken daughter the tabloids gossiped about, and even without a sound, Kiara could feel the crushing weight of the silence that separated the child from the rest of the world. The manager, Mr. Park, materialized beside Kiara with the speed of practiced servitude. His voice was barely a whisper, but the urgency in it was unmistakable. Table 7. VIP section. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not look directly at him. Perfect service only. Kiara nodded, her hands already smoothing the front of her uniform. She watched as Tae-hyung strode toward the private corner booth, his expression carved for marble. Yuna followed, her small fingers reaching out occasionally as if testing the space around her for obstacles that weren't there. No one approached the child. No one offered a smile or a guiding hand. The other waiters circled the table like nervous satellites, their attention fixed solely on the man who signed their paychecks with a single phone call. Kiara moved forward with her tray, water pitcher perfectly balanced. As she neared the table, she heard the sharp intake of breath from a nearby waiter who had fumbled a fork. Tae-hyung didn't even glance up. He was scrolling through his phone, his jaw tight, his entire presence radiating a warning, "Do not disturb." But Yuna was different. The little girl sat rigidly in her chair, her hands folded on her lap, her eyes downcast. She looked like a porcelain doll placed on display, beautiful and untouchable and utterly alone. Kiara set down the water glasses with practiced precision, her movements fluid and unobtrusive. She was halfway through her task when she noticed it, the girl's hands. They weren't still. They were moving. Small, tentative gestures. A flicker of fingers, a twitch of the wrist. Yuna was trying to say something, but no one was listening. Kiara's chest tightened. She recognized that isolation. She had felt it herself, standing in rooms full of people who acted as if she didn't exist. Without thinking, she paused. Her manager's warning echoed in her mind, but something stronger overrode it. She couldn't walk away. Not from this. Slowly, Kiara lowered herself to the girl's eye level, her knees bending until she was crouched beside the table. Yuna's eyes lifted, wide and startled. Kiara offered a gentle smile, then raised her hands. Her fingers moved with careful deliberation, forming the signs she had learned years ago from a deaf neighbor back home. Asterisk hello. What is your name? Asterisk. The effect was instantaneous. Yuna's mouth fell open, her eyes flooding with something Kiara could only describe as recognition. Relief. The little girl's hands flew up, no longer hesitant, signing back with a speed born of desperate need. Asterisk Yuna. My name is Yuna. Asterisk. Kiara's smile widened. That's a beautiful name. And then she felt it, the weight of a stare. She looked up, and her breath caught. Tae-hyung had lowered his phone. His gaze was fixed on her with an intensity that made the entire restaurant fade into background noise. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were not. They burned with shock, confusion, and something else. Something raw and unguarded that he quickly tried to bury beneath his icy exterior. For a moment, the world held its breath. And Kiara realized, with a mixture of exhilaration and terror, that she had just shattered the carefully constructed walls around Korea's most untouchable man. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, crackling with an energy that made Kiara's pulse quicken in her throat. She remained crouched beside Yuna, her hands still suspended in the air from her last sign, acutely aware that every eye in the VIP section had turned toward their table. But none of those stares mattered. Only one did. Tae-hyung's gaze hadn't left her face. His phone lay forgotten on the white tablecloth, his fingers frozen mid-reach. For a man who commanded empires with a single word, he seemed utterly at a loss for what to say. His lips parted slightly, then closed again. The marble mask he wore so effortlessly had cracked, revealing something underneath that looked almost like wonder. Yuna's small hand touched Kiara's wrist, pulling her attention back. The girl's eyes were luminous, brimming with an eagerness that broke Kiara's heart. How long had this child been waiting for someone to see her? Not just look at her, but truly see her? Can you really understand me? Yuna's hands moved with increasing confidence, each sign more animated than the last. Yes, Kiara signed back, her smile widening. I can understand you perfectly. Yuna's face transformed. It was like watching dawn break over a landscape that had been shrouded in darkness for too long. The corners of her mouth lifted, tentatively at first, then blooming into a full radiant smile that made her eyes crinkle with pure joy. She clapped her hands together, forgetting for a moment the rigid posture she had maintained since entering the restaurant. No one ever talks to me, Yuna signed, her movements carrying a weight that no child should have to bear. They talk to father. They talk about me. But never to me. Kiara's throat tightened. She glanced up at Tae-hyung, expecting to find anger or dismissal in his expression. Instead, she found him leaning forward slightly, his entire body angled toward them as if he were trying to decode a language he had forgotten existed. There was something haunted in his eyes, something that suggested he understood his daughter's words even without comprehension of the signs themselves. Well, I'm talking to you now, Kiara signed, reaching out to gently tap Yuna's nose. The gesture was instinctive, the kind of playful affection that transcended language. And I think you have a lot to say. Yuna nodded vigorously, then launched into a flurry of signs. She talked about her favorite color, purple, like the flowers in the garden she wasn't allowed to play in. About the books she read alone in her room. About the bird she watched from her window every morning. That seemed to be the only thing that noticed her back. The words poured out of her small hands like water from a broken dam, years of isolation flooding forth in a desperate rush to be heard. Kiara listened to every word, her own hands responding with questions and encouragement. She had nearly forgotten where she was, forgotten the crystal chandeliers, the wealthy patrons, the nervous manager hovering somewhere behind her, until a voice cut through the intimate bubble they had created. "What is your name?" The voice was deep, measured, and carried the kind of authority that made people straighten their spines instinctively. Kiara's hands still mid-sign. She looked up slowly, meeting Tae-hyung's gaze directly for the first time. Up close, he was even more formidable than the magazine suggested. His features were sharp and aristocratic, his dark eyes intense beneath perfectly shaped brows. But there was something else there too, a vulnerability he was trying very hard to mask. "Kiara, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. She remained crouched beside Yuna, refusing to let the sudden shift in attention make her abandon the child. "Kiara," he repeated, as if testing the weight of it on his tongue. His eyes dropped to her hands, still positioned in front of her from signing. "You know sign language?" It wasn't a question, but Kiara nodded anyway. "Yes, sir. I learned it back home. My neighbor was deaf, and she taught me when I was young." "Back home," Tae-hyung echoed. "Africa." Again, not a question. Kiara held his gaze, lifting her chin slightly. She had learned long ago not to shrink from the observations about her otherness. "Kenya, sir." "Nairobi." Something flickered across his face, interest perhaps, or calculation. He glanced at his daughter, who was watching the exchange between them with rapt attention, her small hand still resting on Kiara's wrist as if afraid she might disappear. "I have never seen her smile like that," Tae-hyung said quietly. The admission seemed to cost him something. Not in a very long time. Kiara's heart squeezed. She looked down at Yuna, whose expression had softened into something peaceful content. "She just needed someone to listen, sir." "Evidently." Tae-hyung leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepling beneath his chin as he studied Kiara with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. She suddenly became conscious of how she must look, crouched on the floor in her server's uniform, her hair pulled back in a simple bun, her dark skin stark against the pristine white of the tablecloth. She was breaking every rule of the establishment, and by the tightness around Mr. Park's eyes visible in her peripheral vision, she would pay for it later. But Tae-hyung didn't seem angry. He seemed thoughtful, calculating, in the way of men who saw opportunities where others saw obstacles. "Stand up, please," he said, his tone making it clear it was not a request. Kiara rose gracefully, smoothing down her apron. She felt Yuna's eyes tracking her movement, the girl's expression faltering slightly as if worried this brief moment of connection was about to end. "How long have you worked here?" Tae-hyung asked. 6 months, sir." "And before that?" "I worked at a hotel in Itaewon. Housekeeping." He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving her face. Kiara had the unsettling sensation of being evaluated, assessed, priced. It should have made her uncomfortable, and it did, but there was something else there too. The way his eyes lingered on her features suggested he wasn't just seeing a potential employee. He was seeing her. Really seeing her, perhaps in the same way she had seen Yuna. "I have a proposition for you, Kiara from Nairobi." Tae-hyung's voice dropped lower, intimate despite the formality of his words. My daughter needs someone who can communicate with her. Someone who can be more than just another member of staff walking past her as if she doesn't exist. I am prepared to offer you a position in my household. The salary will be triple what you earn here, plus room and board. Kiara's breath caught. She heard Mr. Park's sharp inhale from somewhere behind her. Triple her salary? That would mean she could send more money home, could maybe even save enough to bring her younger sister to Seoul for university. But working in a billionaire's home? Living under the same roof as this man whose presence alone made the air feel charged? She began, then stopped, unsure of what to say. Tae-hyung seemed to sense her hesitation. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. You would be Yuna's companion. Her tutor, in a sense. I would not expect you to perform other household duties. There is staff for that. But I'm just, Kiara caught herself before she said it. Just a maid. Just a server. Just someone who wasn't supposed to matter. The words that had been drilled into her through 6 months of being invisible threatened to spill out, but she swallowed them. Yuna was signing something, tugging at her father's sleeve to get his attention. Tae-hyung glanced down at his daughter, his brow furrowing. He clearly didn't understand what she was saying, and the frustration that flashed across his face was raw and unguarded. Yuna turned to Kiara instead, her hands moving urgently. Tell him yes. Please tell him yes. I want you to come home with us. Kiara looked down at the little girl's pleading expression, then back up at Tae-hyung. He was watching them again, and this time there was something almost desperate in his gaze. He was a man who had everything money could buy, and yet his daughter's happiness remained just out of reach. Until now. What is she saying? He asked quietly. Kiara swallowed hard. She's asking me to say yes. Tae-hyung's jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked away, his profile sharp against the soft lighting of the restaurant. When he turned back, his eyes found Kiara's and held them with an intensity that stole her breath. Then say yes, he murmured, and something in his voice suggested he wasn't just speaking for Yuna's benefit. Please. It was the please that did it. A man like him didn't beg, didn't ask. And yet here he was, his carefully constructed armor showing cracks wide enough for her to glimpse the lonely father underneath. Kiara took a deep breath and nodded. Yes. I'll do it. Yuna's squeal was silent, but her joy was deafening. She launched herself at Kiara, wrapping small arms around her waist with a force that nearly knocked her backward. Kiara caught the girl instinctively, one hand going to cradle the back of her head while her eyes met Tae-hyung's over Yuna's shoulder. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a promise, a spark of something neither of them was ready to name. The great billionaire didn't smile, but his expression softened in a way that transformed his entire face. And Kiara realized, with a mixture of exhilaration and terror, that her life would never be the same again. The gates of the Kim estate opened like the entrance to another world. Kiara sat in the back of the sleek black sedan, her small duffel bag clutched on her lap, watching as manicured gardens and marble fountains rolled past the tinted windows. She had seen wealth before, had served it, cleaned up after it, existed in its shadow, but this was different. This was old money, generational power, the kind of opulence that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew. Beside her, Yuna pressed her face to the window, her breath fogging the glass as she pointed excitedly at things only she could see. The girl hadn't stopped smiling since they left the restaurant 3 hours ago. Tae-hyung had insisted Kiara finish her shift, properly resign, he'd said, as if she were leaving a corporate position rather than a serving job, and return with her belongings. A driver had been sent to her tiny shared apartment in Itaewon to collect her. Now, as the car pulled up to the main house, Kiara felt the full weight of her decision settling over her shoulders. The mansion was a masterpiece of modern architecture blended with traditional Korean aesthetics. Clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, dark wood accents against pale stone. It was beautiful. It was also utterly intimidating. The driver opened her door, and Kiara stepped out onto marble pavement, so polished she could see her reflection in it. Yuna bounded out behind her, immediately taking Kiara's hand and tugging her toward the entrance. Before they reached the steps, the massive front door swung open. A woman emerged, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression colder than the evening air. She wore a black dress that screamed authority and a look that suggested she had already judged Kiara and found her wanting. "Mrs. Choi," the driver murmured beside Kiara. "Head housekeeper." Mrs. Choi descended the steps with measured precision, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of Kiara's appearance. The worn sneakers, the second-hand coat, the single duffel bag that contained everything she owned. Her lip curled almost imperceptibly. "So you're the one," she said in Korean, her tone making it clear that the one was not a compliment. Mr. Kim called ahead. "I've prepared quarters for you." Kiara bowed respectfully, falling back on the etiquette she had learned through necessity. "Thank you, Mrs. Choi. I'm grateful for." "Save it." The older woman's eyes were ice. "I don't know what you did to impress Mr. Kim, but understand this. You may have charmed your way into this house, but you are still staff. You will not presume familiarity with the family. You will not wander the house freely. And you will certainly not forget your place." The words were a slap, delivered with surgical precision. Kiara felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her expression neutral. She had endured worse. Yuna's hand squeezed hers tighter, and when Kiara glanced down, the girl was glaring at Mrs. Choi with a fierceness that would have been amusing under different circumstances. "Mrs. Choi." Tae-hyung's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He appeared in the doorway, still dressed in the suit from the restaurant, though he'd loosened his tie. His eyes moved from the housekeeper to Kiara, and something dark flickered across his features. "I believe I was clear in my instructions. Kiara is not to be treated as general staff. She is Yuna's companion and educator. Her quarters should reflect that." Mrs. Choi's expression didn't change, but Kiara saw the tightness around her mouth. "Of course, sir. I've prepared the governess suite in the East Wing as you requested." "Good." Tae-hyung descended the steps, and Kiara was struck again by the sheer presence of him. In the restaurant, surrounded by other wealthy patrons, he had been impressive. Here, in his own domain, he was magnetic. He stopped in front of Kiara, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "I apologize for the confusion. You'll find everything you need in your rooms. Yuna's suite is connected. There's a shared sitting area between them." "That's very generous, Mr. Kim," Kiara managed, hyper-aware of Mrs. Choi's sharp gaze on them. "It's practical," he corrected, though something in his eyes suggested generosity had played a part. "Yuna sometimes wakes at night. It will be easier if you're close by." He paused, then added more softly, "She sleeps better when she's not alone." The admission was vulnerable, unguarded. Kiara saw the way it cost him to reveal even that small detail about his daughter's fears. She nodded, understanding passing between them without words. Mrs. Choi cleared her throat pointedly. "Shall I show her to her quarters, sir?" "I'll do it." Tae-hyung's response was immediate and firm. He gestured toward the entrance. "Come. I'll give you a tour." As they walked through the front doors, Kiara felt Mrs. Choi's stare boring into her back. She had made an enemy before even crossing the threshold. But when Yuna skipped ahead, turning back to sign welcome home with a grin that could light up the cavernous entryway, Kiara decided some enemies were worth making. The interior of the mansion was even more breathtaking than the exterior. Soaring ceilings, original artwork that probably cost more than Kiara would earn in a lifetime, furniture that looked like it belonged in museums. But there was something missing. It took Kiara a moment to identify what it was: warmth. The house was spectacular, but it felt like a mausoleum. Beautiful, perfect, and utterly devoid of life. The main living areas are on this floor, Tae-hyung explained as they walked, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. Kitchen, dining room, my study. You're welcome in the common areas, though most meals can be brought to your room if you prefer. I don't want to be any trouble, Kiara said quietly. He stopped, turning to look at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You're not trouble, Kiara. You're... He trailed off, seeming to reconsider his words. You're here to help Yuna. That makes you valuable. Valuable. Not welcome, not wanted. Valuable. It was better than just staff, but it still reminded her of the transactional nature of her presence. She was here to perform a service, nothing more. They climbed a sweeping staircase to the second floor, Yuna racing ahead to push open a set of double doors. Your rooms, Tae-hyung announced, and Kiara stepped inside. She nearly gasped. The suite was larger than the entire apartment she'd shared with 3 other girls in Itaewon. Soft cream and gold tones, a massive bed with what looked like Egyptian cotton sheets, a sitting area with a view of the gardens, and through an open doorway, a bathroom with a soaking tub that could fit 3 people. On the bed lay a uniform, but not the rough cotton of a maid's dress. This was tailored elegant, a soft dove gray with white piping that looked more like something a private nurse or governess might wear. Mrs. Choi had several made in your size, Tae-hyung said, watching her reaction. If they don't fit or you need anything else, just let her know. Kiara ran her fingers over the fabric, overwhelmed. This is too much. It's exactly enough. His voice was firm. You represent this household now when you're with Yuna. I won't have you feeling less than. Less than. The words hung in the air between them. Did he understand how often she felt exactly that? How many times a day she swallowed the sting of being overlooked, dismissed, reduced to her visible differences. She looked up at him, searching his face for understanding, and found something that made her breath catch. He was looking at her not with pity, but with something closer to recognition. As if he knew what it meant to be lonely in a crowded room. Yuna appeared in the doorway connecting their suites, bouncing on her toes and signing rapidly. Asterisk, come see my room. I want to show you everything. Asterisk. Kiara smiled, the tension breaking. She wants to show me her room. I gathered, Tae-hyung said, his lips quivering slightly. Go ahead. I'll have dinner sent up in an hour. Tomorrow, we'll discuss your schedule and Yuna's needs more formally. Thank you, Mr. Kim. Tae-hyung, he corrected quietly. When it's just us and Yuna, you can call me Tae-hyung. The intimacy of it stole her words. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and let Yuna pull her into the adjoining suite. The girls' room was a contradiction, filled with expensive toys that looked barely touched, shelves of books organized by color, a canopy bed fit for a princess. But in the corner, tucked away as if hidden, was a small pile of well-worn items, a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing, a stack of drawings, a collection of smooth stones arranged in careful patterns. That corner, Kiara realized, was where the Real Yuna lived. As the girl chatted to her in signs, showing her treasures and secrets, Kiara felt something shift in her chest. This beautiful, lonely house with its ice-cold housekeeper and haunted master, it wasn't a home. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, she could help change that. 3 weeks had passed since Kiara crossed the threshold of the Kim estate, and in that time, the mansion had begun to feel less like a mausoleum and more like a home, at least in the East Wing where she and Yuna existed in their own small world. The transformation in the little girl had been remarkable. Yuna laughed now, a silent sound that expressed itself in the shaking of her small shoulders and the brilliant light in her eyes. She ran through the corridors with an energy that had been suppressed for too long, no longer the ghost child trailing behind her father with downcast eyes. But the transformation hadn't gone unnoticed. Kiara felt the weight of observation everywhere she went. The other staff members watched her with a mixture of curiosity and resentment. Mrs. Choi's disapproval had crystallized into something colder, sharper, a hostility that expressed itself in small cruelties. A misplaced meal delivery. Information withheld about household schedules. Pointed remarks made just loud enough for Kiara to overhear about foreign girls who don't know their place. Kiara absorbed it all with the same quiet dignity she had cultivated over years of being underestimated. She was used to being an outsider. What she wasn't used to was the way Tae-hyung had begun to look at her. It had started innocently enough. He would join them for Yuna's lessons, standing at the periphery of the sunlit study room where Kiara taught his daughter not just sign language but mathematics, literature, and art. At first, he remained silent, observing with the same analytical intensity he probably brought to boardroom negotiations. But gradually, he began to ask questions, to comment, to smile, rare brief expressions that transformed his severe features into something almost boyish. Then the boundaries had begun to blur. He started appearing at mealtimes, insisting that Kiara join them at the family table rather than eating in her room. He asked about her day, her thoughts on Yuna's progress, her opinions on matters that had nothing to do with his daughter. And sometimes, when Yuna was absorbed in a book or a puzzle, Kiara would catch him watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken and her skin flush with awareness. She told herself it meant nothing. He was grateful, that was all. Appreciative of what she had done for Yuna. But late at night, alone in her too large bed, she couldn't quite convince herself that gratitude explained the electricity that sparked between them when their eyes met across the dinner table, or the way her breath caught when his hand accidentally brushed hers as they both reached for Yuna at the same moment. It was dangerous, this awareness. Kiara knew better than to let herself feel anything beyond professional satisfaction. She was the help, regardless of the elegant uniform and the comfortable suite. Tae-hyung was a billionaire, a man who existed in a stratosphere so far above her that entertaining any possibility of connection was not just foolish, it was professional suicide. And yet, the night it all shifted, Kiara couldn't sleep. It was past midnight, and she had been tossing restlessly, her mind churning with thoughts of home. She had received a letter from her mother that afternoon, a rare physical message in an age of digital communication, and the weight of it sat heavy on her chest. Her younger sister needed surgery, nothing life-threatening but expensive. The money Kiara had been sending home was helping, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. She slipped out of bed, wrapping a simple robe over her nightgown, and padded barefoot down the darkened hallways toward the kitchen. The mansion was different at night, less intimidating, more intimate. Shadows softened the harsh perfection of the decor, and the silence felt companionable rather than oppressive. The kitchen was a massive space of stainless steel and marble, designed for a staff of professional chefs, but equipped with every modern convenience. Kiara moved through it with the confidence of familiarity, having raided it for midnight tea several times over the past weeks. She filled the electric kettle and leaned against the counter, closing her eyes as she waited for the water to boil. Couldn't sleep. Kiara's eyes flew open, her heart leaping into her throat. Tae-hyung stood in the doorway, and for a moment, she couldn't process what she was seeing. Gone was the immaculate businessman in his designer suits. This version of Tae-hyung wore simple black sleep pants and a white t-shirt that clung to a frame more athletic than his tailored clothing suggested. His hair was slightly mussed, falling across his forehead in a way that made him look younger, more approachable. More human. Mr. Kim, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, Kiara stammered, acutely aware of her own state of undress. The robe was modest, but underneath she wore only a thin nightgown, and her hair fell loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in its usual neat style. Tae-hyung, he corrected gently, moving into the kitchen with the quiet grace of someone accustomed to moving through his own space. And you're not disturbing anything. I'm the one intruding on your midnight routine. He gestured at the kettle. Tea. Yes. Would you like some? Please. The domesticity of it was surreal. Kiara retrieved a second mug, hyper-aware of his presence as he settled onto one of the bar stools at the kitchen island. She could feel his eyes on her as she moved, and it made her hands slightly unsteady as she prepared the tea. Chamomile, he observed as she set the steaming mug in front of him. Not coffee. I've learned that caffeine at midnight is not conducive to sleep, Kiara said, managing a small smile as she took the stool across from him, leaving the safe distance of the island between them. Wise. He wrapped his hands around the mug but didn't drink, his eyes studying her face with that unsettling intensity. You look troubled. Kiara hesitated. The truth sat on her tongue, but sharing it felt like crossing a line. Then again, they were already past so many lines, sitting here in the quiet intimacy of the midnight kitchen, dressed for sleep and speaking in low voices as if afraid to wake the house. I received a letter from home today, she finally admitted. My mother. There are some financial concerns. Tae-hyung's expression shifted, something like understanding flickering across his features. Your family relies on you. My younger sister. She's brilliant, far smarter than I ever was. She deserves opportunities, a future better than. Kiara trailed off, realizing she was about to say better than mine, and how that might sound. Better than working as a maid in a foreign country, Tae-hyung finished for her, no judgment in his voice. You send most of your salary home. It wasn't a question. Kiara wondered how he knew, then realized he probably knew everything about her. Men like him didn't hire people without thorough background checks. Yes. It's not enough. Again, not a question. Kiara's throat tightened. It's more than I could make at home. I'm grateful for the opportunity you've given me. I just wish that you didn't have to sacrifice your own dreams to make theirs possible, he said quietly. Kiara's eyes snapped to his, startled by the accuracy of the observation. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, and something passed between them, recognition, understanding, a shared knowledge of what it meant to carry burdens that no one else could see. What did you dream of? Tae-hyung asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before circumstance intervened. No one had ever asked her that. Not in all her years of working, of surviving, of being strong for everyone else. The question undid something inside her. I wanted to be a teacher, Kiara said, the words tumbling out. Not just tutoring one student, but a real classroom. I wanted to specialize in education for deaf children. After I learned sign language, I realized how many barriers exist for them, how much potential goes unrealized simply because of communication gaps. I wanted to bridge those gaps. I wanted to. She stopped, embarrassed by her own passion. Change lives, Tae-hyung finished. The way you've changed Yuna's. Yuna is special. She just needed someone to see that. So did you. The words were soft but carried a weight that made Kiara's breath catch. Need someone to see you. The air between them felt charged, electric. Kiara found she couldn't look away from his eyes, dark and fathomless in the dim kitchen light. She should make an excuse, should retreat to the safety of her room and the professional boundaries that were rapidly dissolving. But she couldn't move. What about you? She asked instead, her voice barely steady. Did you always dream of all this? She gestured vaguely, encompassing the mansion, the empire, the weight of the Kim legacy. Something painful flickered across Tae-hyung's face. He looked down at his untouched tea, his jaw tightening. No. I dreamed of being an architect. Of building things that would last, that would be beautiful and functional and human. He laughed, the sound hollow. Instead, I build financial portfolios and corporate acquisitions. I inherited an empire when my father died, and with it, the responsibility to maintain it, to grow it, to sacrifice everything else for its preservation. Everything else, Kiara echoed. Including Yuna? The words hung in the air, bold and borderline inappropriate. But Tae-hyung didn't recoil. Instead, he met her gaze with naked honesty.